Good evening and welcome to the program. Don't adjust the set. I'm Gary Hardgrave. Andrew Bolt, of course, on holidays, but there's plenty to talk about tonight, so here's what's coming up. Far North Queensland, Cyclone 1 week, third world conditions the next. And it's not just now Airbus Albo, it's now called Airbrush Albo as the Prime Minister decides what's in and what's out of the potted history of his past year. Now, will New Year be next? Talk of more guerrilla tactics by protesters after that dreadful Christmas Carol stage invasion. But firstly, tonight, with Christmas Day over for another year, I think it's worth reflecting on whether we're actually losing Christmas. Anecdotally, it seemed that there were fewer lights, fewer decorations. Shopping centres, well, they were pretty modest or muted in their Christmas shtick, which I think is pretty sad. It's as if the same woke corporates which took shareholders' money and threw it at that failed Yes campaign are now clawing back their losses by underinvesting in Christmas. You know, they said yes to the divisive voice and now they're saying no to Christmas, one of the most uniting times of the year. Today, of course, has been Boxing Day, a day which was originally created to give gifts to the poor. If the United Nations had been involved 2,000 years ago, it would have, of course, been called the International Gift to the Poor Day. But this all started in Western Christianity. Boxing Day was always known as St. Stephen's Day. And this bloke, St. Stephen, was the first Christian deacon in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. He was eventually charged with blasphemy. As you see, he taught against what was at that stage the established doctrine. But St. Stephen was in fact martyred, stoned to death. And if you know your Christmas carols, you'd know that line from Good King Wenceslas about the Feast of Stephen. Yep, Boxing Day. It all has a very big religious underpinning. But nowadays, Boxing Day is not about giving. It's actually just a part of Christmas, isn't it? Really, the second day of Christmas. It's the day of sales, the day when hot cross buns appear in supermarkets. For heaven's sakes, hot cross buns is all about Easter. How we seem to become a godless lot, haven't we? But Christmas Day is the celebration of the birth of the Christ. It's about giving, not receiving gifts. It's triggered acts of care, concern and compassion, often missing from the rest of the year. Back in World War I, despite the gory battle, both sides on the Western Front stopped fighting on Christmas Day in 1914. They played soccer. They exchanged goodwill. They resumed battle the next day. Sadly, this year, tough economic times, another war in the acknowledged Holy Lands of Israel, or is it the ongoing march of anti-West doctrine? Whatever it is, it seems Christmas is not as in vogue. And I think this is really sad for our children. Christmas has always been a time of optimism, a time of hope, of magic. And we can't do much about war in other places. We can, however, do something about the anti-West mantras now being taught in schools and universities. And we can also do something about our economy. I mean, let's face it, for a start, we're cursed by internationalists determined to weaken the West, countries like ours. You see, they've invented a new god. It's called climate change. They want us to worship at the altar that they've designed. They want to tithe our wages, to pay more taxes to the cause they've decided upon. We're consigning our children to misery as their future. If the left is succeeding in killing Christmas, only you and your family can in fact save it. And I believe we can actually save our traditions, save our Western values, one family at a time. And it's just so vital that parents and grandparents regale younger Australians with stories of effort begets reward, sacrifices can actually achieve success. Let me put it in plain language. If you want a house, you're going to have to actually adjust your selfish behaviour and living for today approach. We should also tell younger people that they should reject this fatalistic rhetoric that the world is on fire. You see, we've always had hot weather, floods, cyclones, drought, and in Brisbane right now, Sydney, the same thing. You know, big storms going across this time of year, that's pretty standard. Climate change is the biggest con job on the world. And so why do we tolerate this putrid hatred of our way of life, which is hurting our children? Our children deserve the magic and the hope of Christmas, yet even at preschools, they're being told Christmas is bad. Chadstone Shopping Centre in Melbourne was invaded by people who had a different view today, all to upset the Christmas norm. It's not offensive to non-Christians this time of year. It's absolute nonsense. Our political class, well, it's so broken. The mantra of the end of days, more tax, more misery, more control of our lives. This fundamental distrust of individuals, while at the same time making society the cause of the worst behaviour. You know, criminals are now victims. Victims of crime, well, you know, they're just collateral. It's all designed to make us doubt our values, doubt our heritage, our way of life. There's plenty of Grinches in government, headlined, I think, by that bloke Chris Bowen. He seems hell-bent on destroying our economy through higher electricity prices, dismantling our sovereignty by destroying our ability to manufacture anything here. He's a danger to your family. But the Prime Minister is just letting him get away with it all. Any wonder the polls suggest this Prime Minister is now a dud. And my guess is that he is going to try and save himself. He's going to throw a few ministers out of their jobs to save his own. So he's hoping Chris Bowen is out the door in 2024, or else, well, frankly, next Christmas may well be the one where we're reminiscing about how good this Christmas really was. Well, let's bring in social commentator Jason Morrison joining us. And Jason, great to see you. Happy Boxing Day, and I hope you had a great Christmas. I mean, have I got it kind of right? You're allowed to disagree if you want.
Oh, look, we're probably 70% on the same track here. I think the left is going to have to try very, very hard to get inside the family unit. They're trying like all buggery, but they're not going to break it. It's too strong. And, you know, we could have had this sort of conversation 20, 30, 40 years ago with the same doomed predictions. But I think when it comes down to it, fundamentally, the values of Christmas and the unity that comes in the community are just Australian values. It's not a religious comment there. That is just simply a statement of reality. We like to come together. We like to be together. We like to reflect on the things that are traditional. And traditional values are very strong. That's why they are traditional. And I think it's going to take a lot more than the useful idiots like Chris Bowen and others to kind of hook up together and to take the sledgehammer to the very, very strong bond that is the family and the unit of friendships that keep our society so strong and together.
Thank you for the optimism and thank you for the hope, because, I mean, my Muslim friends, my Buddhist friends, my Hindu friends, they all wish me Merry Christmas. They're not offended by any of it. Yeah. It just seems like people who don't want to believe in anything are the ones who want to be offended on behalf of others. But look, let's talk about this Chris Bowen bloke. Well, actually, he's not the only Grinch that's in government. Queensland's new Premier, his name is Stephen Miles. His leadership as Premier has now been put to the test. A result of the first poll since he became Premier is out, and it shows that the Liberal National Party is on top with a two-party preferred vote at 51% over the government's 49%. But while opposition leader David Crisafulli is the front runner in the preferred Premier stakes, 53 to 47. Jason, to ensure a win, the Liberal Nationals actually need 56%, not 51. Yeah. The electoral boundaries in Queensland are pretty dodgy. David Crisafulli knows there's less than 10 months to go, and Labor, well, they're going to scratch and fight from here, aren't they?
Yeah, I look at that, and that's actually quite shocking for, I'll call him the outgoing Premier, Mr Miles. It's shocking for him because he's had 9 years to sort of get to know each other. He's had the highest profile roles in Queensland, really, to get to know the public and for them to get to know him. And they kind of pretend, oh, he hasn't been talking much about himself, so this is the time for him to do it. BS, he hasn't been talking about himself. Just about everything's been through the prism of self-interest over the last 9 years. Those self-interests or those of his support base, that being the union self-interest. So I think most people have figured him out pretty quickly. To me, and look, you know, you can tell by my backdrop, I'm a New South Welshman, so I guess you'd expect me to have this view about him. I don't think particularly highly of the man. I think he looks juvenile in the job. I think he looks immature when he's handling important issues. He has that sort of Cheshire dopey grin on his face when he's talking about important stuff. And whenever he's talking about stuff that doesn't matter, he's kind of in full actor mode and pretending to be really serious. Now, you know, people will say, oh, what sort of political analysis is that? I mean, it's a fair point, except not everyone sits down and analyses things politically. People look at the face value of political leaderships in times when, frankly, side A and side B aren't that much different. Which, of course, brings me to the result in Queensland of 1998. You'd remember it very well because you would have been a fresh-faced member of the federal parliament at the time, looking at what was going on in Queensland, when, 22% of Queenslanders voted for one nation out of nowhere. Things like that happen in Queensland because people get the SHITs very quickly in Queensland and they figure out the phonies. And I think what happened in Queensland back then, everyone's got a view on it, but there was a lot of disillusionment. There was disillusionment with the Liberals and independently the national parties, which they stood aside at the same time then, and the Labor Party didn't feel like the right fit then. There are a whole lot of people that were anywhere but the other two. And I'm not going to suggest that's going to happen this time in Queensland, but just remember it can. And remember, it because it can, and it has in the past, as a prospect, a remote prospect, that people will go places they don't normally go in elections. Don't just assume it's product A, Labor, and product B, Liberal National.
Yeah, no, I agree. Queenslanders have got a great sniff test. They look for the strongest leader. And so it really is now up to David Crisafulli, who's saying he's the underdog. And it's a fair enough claim because, as I said, he's got to get to 56%. He's still short. No chocolates yet. Now, Usman Khawaja, who transferred to Queensland from New South Wales in the Australian cricket team, is today fighting back against the International Cricket Council for rejecting an application for him to display a peace dove on his bat in the Boxing Day test, supporting Gaza. But Jason, I have a theory. What he's done wrong here is said, look at me, I'm going to do this. If he'd actually just done it, maybe he might have got away with it. But it all came after Cricket Australia told the opener not to wear a pair of shoes with freedom is a human right and all lives matter written on them in Palestinian colours. I mean, it is in many ways a double standard because other players put other symbols on there, but they're not drawing attention to themselves before they start sticking stickers on the bat, are they?
No, spot on, absolutely spot on. If he had just done it, it would have got a fine, perhaps from the ICC, or nothing at all, or the Australian team could have unified behind him, or Cricket Australia could have just said, don't touch our guy. We actually support what he does. He's allowed to do it. But you're right, look at me. It's the sort of got to create a stir, got to create controversy. I mean, we're seeing on the images there the gesture that's shown there on Marnus Labuschagne's bat. He's a deeply religious Christian man and wanted the world to know some aspect of it. As I recall, there wasn't a hell of a lot of fuss about that. It just happened. And I think that's where Khawaja's gone off the tracks here. Look, he has, I'll say, a little history here of wanting to stand out a bit and have principled stances on things. But frankly, who can blame him? Cricket Australia has done this to itself. I mean, we go back one chief executive of Cricket Australia and we wanted to abandon Australia Day because we were worried it would upset certain people. So we kind of did away with the Australia Day weekends. So, politics has been pushed into cricket for a long time. So I'm not surprised that people like Khawaja in the team and others who've got a bit of a bugbear about things, and let's face it, the captain's one of them too, have not tried to enforce their politics through the game. I'm a cricket fan. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what I would rather be watching right now, but, we're going to the cricket tonight. My son and I, we're on our way right now to go to the cricket.
Good on you.
I love it. I absolutely love the game. I don't like what's being done to it. And I think a lot of people are like that. Yeah. They just want the game back. They want the stars back. They want Australia to be great at the game once more, which we're just about there again. Can we just have the game, please, and stick the politics where it should be? On places like this, on channels like this. Perfect place. Yeah, Usman, take a seat.
Absolutely. Simple message, Uzi. You're not Kath and Kim, you're Khawaja. It's a different K. Just get on with the cricket, which starts with a C. Meanwhile, big storms in Sydney. Obviously, with the Sydney to Hobart yacht race on the 103-strong fleet, hammered by a violent storm. Extremely early stages and very tight. Do you enjoy this entire exciting event in Sydney to Hobart?
I love the courage of the people that go out and do it, and I love the spectacle of it. And it's totally removed from me. I look at the boats. I'll never own a boat like this. I'll never be invited on one of them, even for an afternoon. They're incredible people and courageous at all of that. I have done Sydney to Hobart, and a lot has changed in the 25 years plus since I did it, and I could tell you, looking at the amount of safety conditioning and training that goes on, and the athleticism. I mean, we're all old fat guys going out with eskies back then. It was a very big different sort of scene to what it is now. It's genuinely athletic and generally safety focused, and that's a good thing. Too many guys lost their life. Far too many.
I guess what happened. Yeah, 25 years ago, the 1998 race, of course, 6 people lost, 5 yachts sunk. It was an awful time. A lot was learned from that. Jason, thank you so much for your time. Jason Morrison. Coming up, it's not now Airbus elbow, it's also airbrush elbow as the Prime Minister goes missing on Indigenous affairs post the failed Voice referendum. Welcome back. Over the years, I've continuously argued for more investment in our north. Northern Australia produces so much of our nation's wealth, but decision makers live much further south. So the mantra of take the money and run seems to be the view of too many pollies, even those who love a fun North Queensland holiday. Now, the mess left behind by Tropical Cyclone Jasper last week included the flooding of roads, rail, homes. For Port Douglas, that magnificent tourist town, it was a case of water everywhere, not a drop to drink. The town, you see, ran out of drinking water for 4 days. Douglas Shire Mayor Michael Kerr joins us from magnificent Port Douglas. Mr Mayor, thank you so much for your leadership during these very, very difficult times. What's the latest on the ground there?
Well, we are open at least. We managed to get our water flowing through to Port Douglas, but we just can't get a trick right at the moment. We've gone from having way too much water to we just can't get enough water. So because of all the landslides that have happened throughout the regional area, there's a lot of turbidity in the water and a lot of muck that's in there, and the filtration system's having a really hard time getting enough water into Douglas for what we need for our residents. So we've put an urgent alert out for a restriction 4 and asking residents to just use what you need to, just leave it. Don't worry about hosing at the moment. Leave the, all those things you'd like to do aside so we can just get the water right to make sure we can flush the toilet. We've got drinking water, we've got eating water, and of course our restaurants can stay open for the period right over this Christmas break.
Yeah, we can all make a little difference for you and your community by booking a trip there. I get that, and so we should, because, only if you need us, we'll be there kind of thing. But there's been some pretty extraordinary stories still emerging from your part of the world, including how a couple held onto a tree for 12 hours as the floodwaters tried to sweep them away. Just amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing the amount of water that we had, like 2.5 metres worth of water came through this region in a few days, so you can imagine the amount of damage that it's done. And, I went for a flight up on a helicopter to the Daintree region, and to see Dagara, for example, where you've got more just concrete slabs left where houses used to be than you've got houses. It's incredible sights to see, and it's going to take a long time for the businesses, especially across the river, to recuperate. And this is why we're looking at the state and federal government for more support as far as our businesses go, because it's very unlikely that a lot of the businesses across the river are going to be open yet for quite a few weeks to come. They were shut for 2 weeks. All of Port Douglas was closed for around 2 weeks with the cyclone, the no power, then the no water. We really need help as we're going into the quieter season after this Christmas burst.
I mean, this is a very big recovery task. Look, I must say, I'm based in Brisbane, so you're as far from me as, say, Hobart is. People don't understand how big Queensland is, but when a storm like this hits and you know that people living in a first world country are having third world problems like, water and so forth, I ask the question, why aren't we investing more in the north? I'm sure you've got a few answers.
I tell you, I say exactly the same thing. It is so important that we invest in our water infrastructure, especially in the regional areas, and it's something that we're certainly pushing for. And I'm also the chair of the Far North Queensland Organisation of Councils, which has got 11 councils up here. Between us, I can easily spend $300 million in the next couple of years just to ensure we're still supplying water to our residents. So it's money that's certainly well needed. And, as we're moving forward, we've got to be able to get resilience into the system as well. So when events like this happen, we're on the front foot.
Well, let me promise you, we will not forget what's happening at Far North Queensland. I, for the life of me, do not understand why the Captain Cook Highway, which is Highway 1 to Port Douglas, gets cut. Things are not built as well as they could be, should be, especially for the tourists, people who don't know the region well, who are travelling on roads that can be good in good weather, but can't be necessarily guaranteed to always be open in this sort of weather. We need to invest in your region.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You know, I was once asked, what do I want out of the Olympic Games for my region? And that is for one of the tourists not to be killed on one of my roads, you know. So we absolutely need to have money put into the regional areas for roads, for water infrastructure, for sewerage. You know, we've had a massive inundation of people come up to this way after COVID. And we've got to be able to look after them properly. You know, tourists as well love coming to this region, and we've got to make sure we've got the infrastructure here that keeps them safe, keeps going the whole time. And I have to say one thing at the moment, the Captain Cook Highway is closed, yes, but it gives you the added advantage of getting through Mareeba. And Mareeba is the tropical fruit capital of far North Queensland. So if you are coming up this way and you're going to drive, head up to Mareeba. Make sure you stop at the chocolate factory as well. There's the waterfall circuit there. There's some lovely things to see. It's certainly not an excuse not to come to Port Douglas just because Captain Cook's closed.
Oh, Mr. Mayor, I got to tell you, makes me want to feel like getting in the car and driving for 15 or 16 hours just to check out that chocolate factory. Sounds terrific. Mayor Kerr from the Douglas Shire, thank you so much for your time this evening. Look, we've heard him called Airbus Albo because, well, he loves his VIP 737 jet and an even larger one for those overseas trips. Yet, you know, it's a really neat jet. It's got its own bathroom, shower and all this sort of stuff. The seats that he sits in his private suite, well, they can fold down to form a double bed. Well, look, he's the Prime Minister. But now Airbus Albo has a new moniker. It's Airbrush Albo because he wants to rewrite or erase the narrative regarding his time as Prime Minister. The Voice was a perfect example of a bloke, Prime Minister, comfortable in the VIP class travel but out of touch with the voters. And, well, many tried to change his mind leading up to the Voice referendum failure, but he wouldn't listen. Now he wants to airbrush history to take out his role in the failure of his referendum, which cost taxpayers and, frankly, shareholders of so many big corporates hundreds of millions of dollars. Joining me to discuss this and more from Hobart is Tasmanian Liberal Senator Jonathan Dunningham, and it's great to see you, Jono, and happy Christmas, happy Boxing Day. I mean, what do you make of this Airbrush Albo bloke? I mean, fair income. Amazing.
I mean, it is amazing, absolutely. I mean, thinking he's going to sort of end 2023 by telling people he bore no responsibility for the things that he inflicted on them. Australians didn't choose to have this referendum. Australians didn't choose to go down the pathway that he inflicted on them. They were the first words out of his mouth at the lectern on election night when he won, to talk about honouring the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. Now, Australians wanted him to deal with the things like cost of living, bringing down power prices, making housing more affordable, making sure people could get and keep a job. All of these other things were his doing. And for him to now, it failed, stand up and say, well, this is not my loss. This is not something I bear responsibility for. I think he's just frankly outrageous. And it is similar to what we see in Parliament. A lot of Australians would miss this. But when they talk about, these interest rate rises, they're not our problem. The cost of power, well, that's the Ukraine war. And the blame game goes on. For him to walk away from this is just more of the same. And it's what we expect from a Labor Prime Minister who doesn't take the job seriously.
Look, I was broadcasting on radio in Brisbane today, and I made the point about all of this. I said, it's like Mr. Nobody's come back into vote. Remember, kids used to say, I didn't do it. It was Mr. Nobody. Nobody did it. This is where the Prime Minister of Australia now is. Jonathan, this is a genuine lack of leadership. He won't pull Chris Bowen into line, and now he's hiding the reality that he served up to all of us. Anyway, let's talk about Western Australia. It seems there's a fair bit of airbrushing going on there as the Environmental Defender's Office provides comments which seem as murky as a billabong in the desert regarding involvement with climate activists. So what do you make of that?
Well, honestly, there aren't many more shameful acts for a government to perpetrate than giving taxpayers money, this finite resource that we have to pay for hospitals and schools and roads and all the other essential services we need. But this Labor government is putting it into the Environmental Defender's Office. $8.3 million they've funded the EDO to go and back in legal cases, green lawfare to stop mining developments, other resources developments to ensure that these projects don't go ahead. What kind of a government that sits over and presides over the assessment process and approvals process, then by the same bucket of money goes and funds an organisation to challenge these approvals in court? And not only are they challenging the approvals for projects, they're now, as it appears, because they haven't been able to give us any clarity on this, supporting activists who are allegedly perpetrating wrongs in civil law by trespass and the like. So I'm very concerned about what I read when the EDO are not just going out and protecting the environment as they say they do, but also going out and doing things that are not in line with these environmental protection causes they seem to stand by elsewhere.
Yeah, and for those playing at home, you've heard me say this before, 4,950 pieces of paper Gina Reinhardt had to fill in to open up the massive Roy Hill iron ore mine. I mean, fair dinkum. Government bureaucracy is just mad in this country. Now, Senator, this one is for you. I'm in fact wearing a jacket in empathy with the great salmon industry of Tasmania, very close to you. The threat to pause some salmon farming in Tasmania is becoming a threat to some of your rural communities.
Yeah, well, and Gary, I might just say I quite like your jacket for what it's worth. But yes, again, the Environmental Defenders Office at the heart of this again as well. The Environmental Defenders Office, alongside the Bob Brown Foundation and the Australia Institute, all left-wing, left-leaning organisations that are, in one case, the EDO, taxpayer-funded, have sought to appeal the permits that have been in place for more than 15 years for the salmon industry to operate in Macquarie Harbour, which, for those who don't know, is West Coast Tasmania, the town of Strawn. There are 500 jobs or thereabouts linked to that industry in this community. And Tanya Plibersek has, because the law, she says, dictates she must do this, opened up reconsideration of these permits. Now, she wouldn't have to do this if the EDO, taxpayer-funded EDO, hadn't gone and launched this campaign against it. This industry is sustainable, but it is a further example of green lawfare. Activists from downtown Sydney and Melbourne who are going to do whatever it takes to win a battle against sustainable industries because they don't care about jobs in regional Australia. And it might start with the 500 jobs on the west coast of Tasmania, which will rip the guts out of Strawn and the West Coast, the football club, the school, all of the community organisations. It'll go, like many of the other towns on the West Coast, but it will end at the 5,000 jobs in Tasmania in the billion-dollar industry we have. That's where they're going, and this is why this government needs to actually stand up for workers rather than downtown inner-city elites who they're trying to win the votes of back from the Greens.
Well, I think you're spot on. I mean, Senator Dunniam, the simple reality is Tanya Plibersek is staring at the likely defeat in her seat of Sydney. The Greens are going to get her at the next federal election. She's making dumb decisions all over the country. Environmental flows through the Darling River, heavens above, that's a river that needs to dry out every so often. You're changing the ecology of the river if you want to put lots of water into it all the time. Then they're doing this to the salmon industry, the craziness of lopping off the tops of hills in far North Queensland to put up wind turbines. This woman really is playing to the Green vote she's worried about.
Well, absolutely, Gary. And you know what's worse? In 2024, this government is going to set about changing the environmental approval laws at a federal level that have been in place for 20 years. Now, they've needed updating for some time. That's something we embarked upon. But here we are, staring down the barrel of a very left-leaning environment minister who is, as you said, having the Greens snap at her heels in her electorate. And that means we are going to be seeing laws that will appease the Greens. That cannot be good for our economy. That cannot be good for jobs. And above all else, it probably won't be good for the environment, because when you lock it up and throw away the key, we know the outcome is far worse than managing the environment in line with best practice and world-leading science, which is what many of our productive primary and extractive industries do. But this is what 2024 is going to hold. And Gary, I fear for those who work in the mining sector, those who work in fisheries and forestry, and particularly on the land in farming, it's going to be a grim year if Tanya Plibersek teams up with the Greens and David Pocock and others again, because they'll be shutting down an industry in every community, and that is bad for our economy and our country.
Yeah, the productive elements of society are not needed. What did the Greens once say? You don't need farmers, you just go to Woolworths and Coles. I mean, spare me. Heavens above, I don't know how you put up with that malarkey that goes on day in, day out in the Australian Senate. Christmas, how's Christmas been for you in Tasmania? Have we lost a bit of that Christmas buzz we used to have? Because I feel like a few people are sort of putting it back into their pocket saying, don't want to offend anybody.
Well, I think that is sadly the case. I mean, we're seeing people who would once upon a time have adorned their stores and public buildings with messages of what the season's all about, and that is the birth of Christ. And we are a Judeo-Christian nation. That's the foundation of what we as a country are built upon. But here in Tasmania, we've got an Equal Opportunity Commission, which, of course, will come after you with the full force of the law if you happen to offend anyone by expressing certain views. And so a lot of businesses and community leaders have decided to, as you say, put it in their pocket. And as a result, have gone on to just wish people season's greetings. But I wholeheartedly say Merry Christmas, and may it be a blessed one to all of your viewers, and particularly here in Tasmania where we need it.
Good on you, Liberal Senator for Tasmania, Jonathan Duniam. I've been saying for years to Paul Murray, I said the biggest growth industry in Australia were those who want to be offended on behalf of others. Thanks so much for your time, sir. Coming up, more guerrilla tactics seen to be planned by protesters after that dreadful Christmas Carol stage invasion. And welcome back. I'm Gary Hargrave for Andrew Bolt. Over the weekend, police arrested a 21-year-old after multiple protesters stormed the stage at the annual Carols by Candlelight event in Melbourne. This is Christmas Eve, to protest for Palestine. They're at it again today at the Chadstone shopping centre in suburban Melbourne today. It stopped the show, but one is said to have been armed with a box knife. Another managed to grab the microphone. Have a look. We show you because the stupidity should be aired. We're not promoting the cause, we're showing you the stupid. Let's bring in my panel tonight. Will Kingston, the host of the Australiana podcast by The Spectator Australia, and Sky News contributor James Bolt. Now, Will, you're over in France, relatively safe by comparison to what the rubbish happened in Melbourne the last couple of days. The chorus of boos at the carols on Christmas Eve, I mean, that should have told these people, loud and clear that they're not wanted.
Yeah, it should have, Gary. The interesting thing is that the philosophy of protest has changed with the rise of wokeism in recent years. It's gone from an act of persuasion, an act of raising awareness, to this form of sick moral retribution. It's a way of saying, I'm a little bit better than you. These types of people, same goes with people like Extinction Rebellion. They must know that they're not really persuading undecided voters, in inverted commas, but what they're doing is that they are, I guess, they're projecting to their tribe that they are morally virtuous. This just annoys people. It doesn't get people on side, but I sense they know that.
Yeah, I call them morally and intellectually superior in their own mind. I mean, I had a bloke send me a text yesterday saying, I'm not going to wish you Merry Christmas out of solidarity with the town of Bethlehem, which the Palestinian authorities decided to cancel Christmas. So I'm not wishing you Merry Christmas. However, I do wish you the best. I mean, James, I don't get it. I do not for the life of me understand why people would bother to send such a dreadful message as that. And the story today coming out of some in the Jewish community leadership is that we're going to see guerrilla tactics for New Year's coming up. That's this Sunday night. I don't want to give anybody ideas, but I can't see these protests stopping anytime soon.
As popular as this show is, I don't think the people that would be doing anything on New Year's Eve are watching right now, so I don't think you're giving away too many ideas. I think that text message is interesting, though. The person the person writing to you would just say, I'm not doing this, and this is my decision that I'm not doing this. As Will said, it's all about the individual. A true pro-Palestinian cause would have been very humble, talking about the issue, wouldn't have attracted attention away from Carols by Candlelight. That would have been the way if they wanted to be serious about it. But instead, we see mugging for the camera, we see seizing a microphone, we see making people on stage feel threatened. It's all about them. It's nothing about the Palestinian cause. And it's interesting that when we see pro-Israel demonstrations, there's none of this sort of showboating. It really is only with the pro-Palestinian cause.
Yeah, and those who want to be offended on behalf of others, the biggest growth industry in Australia. I've been saying it for years. Let's just stay with the war now, and Israel's ambassador to Australia is accusing Anthony Albanese, airbrush Albo, for contradictory messages. Amir Maimon is questioning how the Prime Minister can actually support the removal of Hamas from power in Gaza and also call for a ceasefire in the Middle East. It's pretty evident. If Hamas ceasefire right now and gave up, then the whole thing would be over. But the Israeli bloke says that Israel's fight against Hamas is being treated differently to Australia's operations in Afghanistan, and his citizens do actually feel not so secure in this country. I mean, it's sad to say that Australia is now being seen as a not so secure country.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think this goes to the fundamental problem for Anthony Albanese's leadership, which is on too many issues, he doesn't really believe what he's saying. He had to do the whole kind of move to the centre routine to try and win office, but he is still that far left, Tory bashing crusader from the campus of Sydney University. The instinct to be anti-Israel permeates the Labor Party. I think it permeates the thoughts of Anthony Albanese, and that's why you've seen the fluctuations in his position on this matter. Keep an eye out for this across 2024, because I think the real Albo, if indeed there is one, will become more obvious as this sort of faux centrist routine wears off in the next 18 months in the lead up to the next election.
Now, major Australian companies are being warned to remove a Chinese-owned data tracking tool from TikTok over concerns that companies are harvesting people's data without their consent. Shadow's Cybersecurity spokesperson James Patterson has slammed the Albanese government's negligence on this front this afternoon.
It's highly likely that Australians who've never downloaded or viewed TikTok in their lives, might not have even heard of TikTok, have had their personal information harvested by this company, and that data could well be already in China. The Albanese government really needs to do much more, and there's dozens of recommendations that have been made to them to solve this problem with TikTok. Now, if those policies had been implemented, we might have known about this already, but because the Albanese government has failed to do so, we've had to rely on a private company and a newspaper organisation to bring these revelations to light.
I mean, Senator Patterson's claims, nothing new in that, but James Bolt, you wouldn't be surprised by this?
Yeah, I'm not surprised, and I don't think too many millennials or Generation Z people would be surprised either. The problem is they just have a simple difference of their approach to privacy that other generations have had. I mean, people my age, people Will's age, we've grown up broadcasting our thoughts, photos and videos to our friends on social media, so they don't really see TikTok as anything different to Facebook or Instagram. I mean, obviously it is, but they don't see it that way. And the problem with that is they're only going to change their minds about whether or not they need to keep their data safe, whether or not they need to be wary of TikTok when something really bad happens. Now, bad things have happened, but nothing of the catastrophic scale I think it's going to need for people to change their minds about putting their information on TikTok.
Yeah, I've told a few people who have ambitions to be in politics somewhere down the track, I said, don't put anything on social media that you wouldn't put on a billboard in the main street of the electorate you covet. Will, let's go to you now, and the government now more than ever, the government probably needs to start regulating how these companies are using the data, surely.
Well, more than that, they need to ban TikTok immediately. I think we're sleepwalking on this issue.
Yeah.
This is a massive data gathering operation from a hostile foreign power that we may be in some form of conflict with in the next 5 years. I find it staggering that the West, Australia, USA, the UK, somehow still have this operation running in their countries. But not only just being a data gathering operation, it is digital fentanyl for our children. There is no coincidence that the Chinese algorithm pumps out engineering videos in China to kids there, and we get celebrities twerking. This is, I think, a very deliberate, a very conscious act of cultural imperialism on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, and the Australian leaders need to wake up. This is dangerous. It needs to be banned immediately.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Now to Sydney, where thousands flocked to a beach party on Christmas Day at Bondi, and they've left behind mountains of rubbish. I mean, James, it's very un-Australian, these revellers. Locals, well, they're pretty pinged off.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's a Waverley Council, and I feel very sorry for the locals there, but I don't feel sorry for the council. This is a party that's been happening for a number of years now. It's certainly not the first time I've heard about this story and the locals leaving behind rubbish. So it's a bit of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. You think about councils these days, they've got 3 responsibilities: roads, rates and rubbish. Well, really in the modern day, it's 4 responsibilities: roads, rates, rubbish, and negotiating an end to the Ukraine war. But rubbish is still in there. And you would have thought that the council itself... You would have thought the council itself would have had a thought, you know, every year this party happens and every year they leave up rubbish and we never do anything about it. Should we do something this year? Now, they do say that it's too hard, the beach is too hard to negotiate a ticketing system. Maybe that's true. But how do you not have rubbish collectors working double time on this day just to make sure that your locals are safe because there's broken glass on the roads? So I go to the council website, sorry to go on a rant here, but I go to the council website, I see that they've got a local environment action plan, their 5th local environment action plan. So they've had 5 action plans, none of them deal with the rubbish on the roads. And instead of talking about rubbish on the roads, they talk about net zero community emissions by 2030, 100% renewable energy, and enhancing climate resilience. So probably, I would say to Waverley Council, a little less climate resilience, a little more beach resilience.
Yeah, I'd reckon throw them out would be my strong advice to anybody who votes in the Waverley Council election. Now, after 30 years of being banned from the royal family's Christmas festivities, Sarah Ferguson, she's been welcomed back to celebrate Christmas at Sandringham. Now, Will, Sarah has stood side by side with her ex-husband, Prince Andrew, and of course Harry and Meghan were noticeably absent from the festivities. I guess this is probably a pretty good thing, isn't it, Will?
I don't really care, Gary, to be honest, but what I would say is if you are a Republican in Australia, get used to this stuff. I think the legacy of the Voice campaign and the Voice referendum this year is that no Australian politician is going to touch a referendum for the next 2 decades. So the monarchy, we're going to have it for a long time.
And I've got to say, James, I reckon for his first Christmas speech as a monarch, he failed to mention the spare in his message. Pretty bold from the King.
My favourite part of the Christmas message that the King went 3 minutes and 20 seconds before he brought up climate change. Now, if that's not a Christmas miracle, I don't know what is.
Yeah, circling the drain, I think he was on that one. I was sitting there waiting, and it was on my bingo card, no doubt about it. Well, Will Kingston, James Bolt, thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight. After the break, next year's global economic outlook. What can we expect in 2024? And welcome back. Boxing Day sales were, of course, on today. The National Retail Association expected shoppers to splurge $23.9 billion this year, which is triple the amount spent on the Black Friday sales. And according to new analysis, the cost of living crunch seems to have affected spending patterns right across Australia. Households are cutting back on purchasing electronics by 40%, but not on coffees, not on brunches. Rental payments, well, they're 12% higher than they were last year, and spending on health practitioners has also been 12% higher. So let's bring in macro business chief economist Leith Van Onselen, who's joining us now. I mean, are you surprised by any of this, Leith?
No, not really. I mean, obviously, Australian households have had it pretty tough in the last 12 months. The national accounts for the September quarter that were released, earlier this month showed that per capita household incomes have actually fell by 6% in the last year. So effectively, households are getting smashed, obviously, by higher interest rates. They've had the wage growth below inflation, rising rents, all that sort of thing. And because of that, we're actually cutting back spending. So the latest retail data from the ABS, as well as the household consumption data, is all falling. So I'm not surprised that retailers are doing it tough on the goods side. And also, there's a global glut in goods at the moment. So basically, anything that comes in to the country via boat or ship has been falling in price. And we're basically getting a reversal of what happened during the pandemic when we had all these supply shortages. Now we've got the supply side has rebounded just as global demand's decreased. So effectively, we've got this oversupply of goods as well, and that's now exporting goods deflation across the globe.
That's really interesting. I mean, Leith, I know that when America gets a sniffle, we need a lung transplant here in Australia, and former US President Donald Trump, the likely Republican candidate, well, he's proposed slapping a 10% tariff on all goods coming into the United States. I thought we had a free trade agreement with them. I mean, that's not going to help our economy, is it?
No, it won't. I mean, look, I don't think that'll get up. Well, I hope it doesn't anyway. It seems like pretty retrograde sort of economics. But at the same time, if there's one country that could potentially do it, maybe it's the US, because it's such a, it's basically, the largest economy in the world. We certainly couldn't do it, but let's all hope it doesn't do that.
Yeah, okay. So we've had multiple wars through the course of this year, elections, more, threatening to the global economy this year. I mean, what can we expect in 2024? Yeah,
look, I think we're actually, and obviously this has got caveats on it because there's a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East here, which could easily scuttle this discussion. But I think, I think most of the central banks have actually finished their tightening cycles, which is good after 18 months of absolutely punishing households across the world, especially here in Australia. So because of this whole, global deflation in goods story, I think, inflation's coming down across the globe, including here. And I think, and also we've got some weakening economies. So I think the central banks are done with rate rises. We can actually start seeing some rate cuts later in the year, which should be great news. Here, domestically, I think we're going to have another pretty tough year because obviously households have just been smashed. We've had falling incomes, etc. One thing that's actually held up the economy in the face of those falling incomes was households drew down on their savings. So the savings rate fell to zero effectively in the national accounts. What that means is because they've burned through their savings, unless we get income growth, we're not going to have growth in household consumption. So all our growth is going to effectively come from population growth. And I think that what that means is that Australia's going to have a very weak economy. We're probably going to have this ongoing per capita recession into 2024.
And I mean, isn't this a real point, this Ponzi scheme of immigration? We're bringing migrants here, which has always been the basis of how we've grown a lot of things in Australia. But I don't think they've got real purpose. There's actually not a real gig for them to do. We can't have a barista-led recovery in Australia, for instance. The planners, they love the idea of plenty of coffee makers, but we want people to go and build dams and build power stations, build roads, rail, that sort of infrastructure. We're just not doing that.
Yeah, 100%. Look. A major problem is the immigration program now is skewed through the universities, through the foreign student route, and unfortunately, a lot of the data that comes out there, a lot of them actually get paid a lot less than domestic graduates. They don't work as much. Yeah. They tend to be underemployed, etc. So they tend to go into more lower skilled professions, and it's also tends to be professions that we don't necessarily have shortages in. We don't get builders in. We don't get which is exactly what we need, obviously, with this infrastructure boom and housing boom.
Yeah.
So we've got basically we've got all these supply mismatches, and the biggest example of that's actually, for example, engineering. So foreign engineers make up 60% of engineers in Australia, foreign-born engineers, and half of them are either unemployed or underemployed, and they don't work in engineering, which just shows you how broken the skilled migration system is. And it's the same across accounting and several other, so-called skilled professions.
Yeah, no, it's a real mess, no doubt about it. Leith Van Onselen, thank you so very much. I mean, I just don't know what the government planners think they're currently doing, because there's no vision about where we want to take Australia to. That's what's missing. That's all we have time for tonight. I'm back on radio and 4BC here in Brisbane at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. But coming up here on Sky, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price's documentary. She explores the chilling cold case of her relative who went missing as a 15-year-old. That's 41 years ago. It's quite an amazing program. And I'll see you here tomorrow night. Have a good night.